welcome to another episode of Quick Hits. I'm your host, Ken Booth, joined as always by my co-host, Tyler Smith. Tyler, how's it going this week?
I am always excited to be here, Ken, and very excited about our guest today.
Oh, for sure, yeah. We've got a couple of rock stars here from HDM who I'm sure this is going to be a great conversation. Before we get to them, though, I understand you are still traveling this week. Where are you at? Where in the world is Tyler Smith, I think is the new game.
Yeah. So I actually just caught up with Peter in Philadelphia, which was nice. And I was in New York earlier this week. And I'm actually headed to Richmond, Virginia. And then next week I'll be back in the New York area, headed up to upstate New York. And we've also got a lot of other travel going on with other team members in the Bay, in South Florida. So it's good to see everybody, good to see and hear about everybody back on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, continue to have safe trips. I'm sure catching up with Peter. He's always kind of firing on all cylinders. So I'm sure you guys were making some awesome magic happening.
Definitely.
Well, let's get right into our interview this week. It's sure to be a fun one. We've got Dan Olson and Boris Gladkick. I'll kind of let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about them, their career here. We'll start with Dan Olson.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Dan Olson. I'm the lead engineer for Health Data Movers. I've been with the company since 2017, so a bit over 6 years, I think. And yeah, I've done a whole bunch of different app development, integration, data conversion, you name it, all kinds of different projects. And yeah, looking forward to talking with you.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Dan. And Boris, please.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. My name is Boris Gladkick. I've been with HTM as an engineer since 2020 now, working primarily on application development projects with Dan. And yeah, excited to see what's in store for this for this conversation.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, it's certainly been awesome kind of working with you two as far as in engineering. Dan, I think I've known you the longest, actually, of everyone at Health Data Movers. You're the OG. Like I think I met you at Otter way back in the day,
Yep.
HKS, and you were kind of the one that helped me get into the consultant world, actually. So have you to thank for that. And I believe you also hold the distinction of being one of the single digit employee numbers here at Health Data Movers.
Yeah. I think, I believe I'm the first full-time employee. There are obviously a large number of consultants
Sure.
who were with the company before me, but I think it's either me or Angeli, and I'm not sure exactly.
Right.
But yeah.
The first official. Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And Dan, I mean, like you said, your experience is kind of really all over. Same with you, Boris, but let's kind of focus on Dan just a little bit because you've been in healthcare for so long. I guess the question I wanted to ask you both, and we'll start with you, Dan, and then I'll roll over to Boris. Did you always kind of have your sights set on healthcare, or were you originally just like, I want to be in software, and then it turned into healthcare?
Actually, I have a little bit of a varied past and all that. Like, I didn't go to school I actually went to school, studied math and physics, and was thinking about a different type of engineering, not software engineering, but I've always been really into programming and, computer science stuff as a hobby and all that. So I'm mostly self-taught when it comes to all that. But yeah, when it really started, I had one job where I was doing development work before I started at Otter. But then got in at Otter, and that was more a coincidence than anything that I was in the healthcare space. I wasn't specifically looking for that. It seemed like a very interesting space to be in. They were doing a lot of cool stuff with the Otter. For those who don't know, is, I guess, still used to be called, the company was called HKS, but they make a kind of a organ transplant specific EMR system. This was before Epic had Phoenix, and Cerner still doesn't, to my knowledge, have a dedicated organ transplant EMR. So Ken and I both worked there in the past, and yeah, I just got in through a connection of someone I knew who pointed it out to me, and yeah, things kind of took off from there.
And they are now called CareDx, for those that don't know. But funny story about Otter is, so when I was hired at Otter, it was replacing Brian Battistone, who is one of the founders of HTM, who had recently left. And so that's when I met Dan, as I was replacing Brian. So a lot of history there. But so you ended up in this cool healthcare space, and what made you really start kind of focusing on development? Because when I remember, what I recall about Otter is that, I mean, you could, like, there was an interest in software development, but there were a lot of other areas in Otter because it was a small company at the time. So, you could have gotten into project management. You could have gotten into a lot of different things. You could have even gotten more into the clinical side. What was it about software that really appealed to you, do you think? Is it just because of your background in math and physics?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because at Otter, I didn't mention this, but at Otter, I wasn't even on the development team there. I was a systems engineer, but I was one of the few systems engineers who also did some coding work. So, like, I committed some code and did some bug fixes, stuff like that. Yeah, but it was, as you said, there were some other project management and things like that. And when I worked at Otter, I did a lot of those types of things. But I think where I really took off in terms of development was actually the job I had after Otter, which was at University of Southern California at Keck Medicine in the organ transplant department there. I got a job there, and my job was basically just to build whatever the organ transplant department needed, and a lot of that was very database centric. A lot of database reports and crystal reports and things like that, but there were a lot of other things too, and I was just kind of playing the jack of all trades, building a lot of different types of solutions for them, for different products, and that's probably where I really got the greatest appreciation for just designing and building solutions, which is kind of what I've continued at HTM. But yeah, I think it's all in a part. I've always been really into problem solving and all that, and those are the things I liked about math and physics, and those are the things that I like about designing solutions and everything now. So there is a through line there, but it's kind of just an abstract appreciation for problem solving and building things.
Yeah, absolutely. I recall some of those sessions with Paul Kenyon as we were sitting there like looking for bugs. That was cool. That was kind of my exposure to software development as well, and that definitely I'd done a little bit before being an Otter, but yeah, it was like, oh man, there's so much potential here. But
yeah, shout out to Paul Kenyon and his inspiring Vim skills. I remember watching him do that, and that. Actually, I probably don't give that. That's probably the reason I went into development, was watching him use Vim. So, yeah. Or Vi. Awesome. I'm not sure if he used Vi or Vim, but one of them, yeah.
I think it was Vim. I do. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Boris, what about you? Is HDM your first healthcare IT job, or were you in healthcare prior to this?
No, HDM is my first foray into the healthcare field. It's actually my first corporate non-freelance engineering gig, software development gig as well. And I think one of my favorite things about software engineering and being able to work for all these different companies and is it's actually a bit like cultural anthropology, where you get to, you work with development and computer science and applying that knowledge to different, completely different fields, and you get to kind of sit in and learn a little bit about those fields. And I was open to any type of work that interested me. I was looking into fintech and healthcare, and I have my sister was actually doing medical coding at the time, and I was super interested in how healthcare applies to software development with, a heavy focus in security, obviously with PHI, and just, making sure your data is secure and encrypted, and your communications are, communication is secure as well. And the fact that, going through the healthcare system, a lot of stuff is very outdated, and there's a lot of catching up to do, to adapt to new technologies, and kind of just getting the system up to date. A lot of state and federal things, like we saw that with COVID, with the unemployment websites, where it just wasn't designed to, take such a large increase in people, and just being part of a company that actually does that and updates applications and provides awesome new solutions and tools is just it's rewarding and super interesting.
Yeah, so you reminded me of something. So much like Ryan Lieberman, you got into healthcare IT right at the start of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I've been with the company since 2020. I think since December 2020. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
So yeah, so man, you guys, you picked an excellent time to just, I don't know, jump into the deep end of the pool there. But you hit on a good point that I'd kind of like to discuss here when it comes to upgrading tools. Over the last couple of years, have you seen a shift in the industry when it comes to like being willing to even update technology?
I think even not just as a developer, but even as a patient of healthcare myself, and, going to get regular exams, and, going to my primary care provider, or going to, Planned Parenthood for testing, and just, general healthcare visits have completely just they've definitely taken a step forward in terms of just adapting technology, like using my chart and being able to do a lot online, being able to be notified of prescriptions and everything just via text message, and getting even reduced price, like little like subscription cards to pick up prescriptions via text from your doctor, and the little things like that. It's just it's definitely come a long way from, sending and faxing medical information and having to wait for different offices to look up your charts and having it all lost. It's been a crazy shift as a patient, and obviously as a developer, seeing the tools we're able to provide, specific companies specifically for what they're trying to do. It's just, it's growing at a very rapid and accelerated rate.
So the follow-up question for both you and Dan, you both have worked on basically building an EMR or EHR from the ground up. I'm not sure, Tyler, if we're allowed to mention these clients, so I won't, but I'll let you do that that way, that's on you. But the question is, has your experience as a patient, has that changed how you develop? Has that really informed you in any way when it comes to developing a new feature or anything like that? Are you thinking about this from the patient perspective, or are you mainly working on things that are provider facing?
Well, personally, since the applications we've primarily developed and the EMR we built from the ground up isn't patient facing, it's for use for technicians and doctors, in the office. I think it's just taking the approach of trying to make everything as user intuitive and as simple to use, while providing, the proper functionality, and trying to figure out things that, the QA or the requirements may not have thought of, and just trying to provide as seamless of an experience as possible. But I don't think, I personally have not worked on any patient facing healthcare technology. I'll let Dan talk about his experience.
Yeah. What about you, Dan?
I think I'm trying to think through past projects. Really, we have mostly worked in tools for providers, and not patients. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think that's because I think there have been a few things that had in the future, patient portal type sides to them, but usually that's like a phase 2 or 3. It seems like the place most healthcare spaces are in right now is just trying to improve processes internally for their providers, and then whether that's correct or not, they seem to be prioritizing that ahead of the patients, which I guess kind of mirrors the whole high-tech act and all the thing that prompted everyone to get into the EMR space much more heavily was much more around provider usage as a primary thing, and then patient portal and portability of patient records was another part of it. But I think that was, as far as calendar scheduling, that was a thing that came up afterwards. But yeah, it's like Boris said, even if it's not patient facing, we especially as technical workers, we interface with a lot of different types of UI and deal with a lot of good and bad UX, and so I think you definitely pick some of that up and try to use the good ideas, avoid the bad things, and all that.
So Dan, I thought you worked on a chatbot application. Was that wasn't patient facing?
Oh, I did, and it was patient facing, but that was within a pretty narrowly constrained. Like I was building the back end for it basically, so I didn't do any UI UX because it was an existing chatbot, and I was just adding in integration capabilities. So
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So I guess a question, I mean, since we're talking chatbots and that kind of just naturally leads to AI, guys, let's talk AI in the development world. How would you say that, or would you say that AI has helped you in the last few months? And if so, how?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely has. I make pretty heavy use of Copilot, GitHub Copilot, on the project we're working on now. That's very helpful for just accelerating the speed of development and not getting bogged down in a lot of boilerplate or, looking up references for things if you don't code things very frequently. If any developer probably knows the whole dance where you go to Stack Overflow to remind yourself of something or to troubleshoot a bug or something, and then you end up spending half your time sifting through to figure out, separate the good answers from the bad. Copilot's very good for just short-circuiting a lot of that whole process and just giving you, more directly what you need. Also, with ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, like the free version, was kind of marginal. It was hit or miss. Sometimes it would be helpful, sometimes it wouldn't if you posed it questions. But GPT-4, the version that's available if you're a subscriber or paid, I think, what's it called? ChatGPT Plus or something like that?
GPT Plus or whatever.
Yeah. The GPT-4 version is actually just, quantitatively, I think they doubled or something the number of parameters in the network, but qualitatively, it's night and day. You get very reliably, not 100%, but I also think it's funny how our standards have adjusted so quickly for these things, where GPT-4 will give you accurate answers to probably like 95% of any question you could ask it about any programming language, any bug, any whatever, which is an insanely broad range of things, to be able to address. But people tend to focus on the 5% that it still misses on, where it's funny though, because obviously there's no human on earth who could hit 95% on that wide of a range of topics or anything like that. But
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
So qualitatively though, the newer version is incredibly good. You can, especially the primary way I use it with programming is you can just tell it the error you're getting. And again, if anyone's a developer out there, you know how annoying it can be trying to Google an error message and again, sift through all of the discussion to figure out what the problem actually is, how to fix it and all that. And ChatGPT is very good at helping you to troubleshoot those things very quickly.
Yeah, agreed. It's almost like having, I remember instances where, you ask the expert something and then 5 minutes later you're like, okay, now I'm stuck on this. with Chat GPT, it's kind of like having that person just sitting over your shoulder, helping you get through, whatever issue you're having, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And absolutely. I actually wanted to ask a follow up on this. Dan, when you first started using it, you sent me the article where it was 2x productivity, and you said kind of anecdotally you and Boris were finding that to be the case. That was about a month and a half ago. Where is the productivity right now? Is it still at 2x, or is it increasing or holding steady? Just be curious.
Yeah, I think it varies a lot, probably depending on what you're working on in the context and your familiarity. I think for anyone, if for example, if you were working in a new framework or on something that you weren't as familiar with, I think it would probably be well above 2x, because it just makes it so much easier to just acquire, if you run into a concept you don't understand in a framework or something like that, you can just, like Ken said, it's just like having an expert right there pair programming with you. You can just ask anything and very quickly get past any kind of blockers in terms of not understanding things. I think on a greenfield project, it would also be probably well above 2 times productivity, because those projects tend to involve a lot of initial boilerplate and building things from scratch. Whereas if you're working in an existing code base, there are some additional constraints that potentially make it. I mean, I still think it's a significant boost in productivity, but maybe not quite as much, maybe not 2 times over the long run. But I think like any tool, it really depends on the way you use it. There are some people, I think, who use it very passively, who just wait, like with Copilot, just wait for it to suggest something. But if you use it a bit more proactively, like you can start typing in a comment in the code and then let it autocomplete to suggest things. Sometimes it could, it'll be surprisingly good at guessing, what you were about to spend 10 minutes coding, and you can just autocomplete it. And save yourself 10 minutes here and there. And yeah, I remember the study I sent you, and I forget exactly how they quantified it, but yeah, it'd be very interesting to actually do a study where you tried to estimate every time, it auto-completed. It's just like autocomplete typing on your phone, except I guess less annoying. Autocomplete is kind of known for messing up on your phone, but it's like that, but imagine it will just spit out an entire block of code, an entire function or something like that. And that's always very impressive when it does that.
Almost as if autocomplete would complete your entire sentence instead of just the word that you're typing. Yeah.
Yeah. And do it like very well, to the point where it conveyed an insight that you were about to convey, in a very surprising way. So yeah.
Boris, what about you? Any thoughts on AI, the AI revolution?
I definitely depended a lot on Google Foo and leaning towards using Stack Overflow when running into issues, either with new frameworks or errors, like Dan mentioned. But Dan has shown me the way of ChatGPT. I definitely think 3.5 and 4, it's definitely a huge leap of just usability. And I don't use Copilot, but I've seen, Dan and I have done pair programming, and I've seen how it saves him a lot of time, but I just, I'm being stubborn about it. But I do use ChatGPT 4 now instead of going to Stack Overflow for an issue or an unknown error. And it's really nice to have the dialogue with ChatGPT and just maintain the chat and keep things within context, and being able to reference earlier points, feed it some code once, or feed it the error once, and then kind of reference those points and be like, okay, well, how about we try a different solution where you're not recommending, this library that I don't want to extraneously use, because I know I can just code this myself without having to reinvent the wheel. And it's definitely cool, and it's definitely a fundamental skill of the developer to be able to describe what they're running into in plain English. So it just kind of sharpens that blade, even as remembering my junior developer days, as if this doesn't still happen. And I asked engineers for help, but you can't just come to someone and be like, oh, this doesn't work. They'll be like, what have you tried? What is it?
I've tried that. Right.
This is broken. Okay. How's it broken? What are you getting? What's the error?
Right.
What are you getting up to? Have you tried to debug it? What steps do you get to? And if you don't come with the extensive, things you've done yourself, the engineer will be like, you're wasting my time. And ChatGPT is kind of the same way, but instead it wastes your time. It's like the less context you give it, the more general it is with its answers. And
right.
I've found that if you're not getting the correct response, or you're kind of hitting a wall, just rephrase the question. If you're using 3.5 for some reason, sometimes it's worth kind of just starting from scratch. But with 4, you can recontextualize your answer within the subject you're talking, or question rather, and you can really it'll get you there eventually. But it's still kind of hard for me to sometimes be like, okay, do I waste Dan's time? Do I waste my time with Stack Overflow, or do I jump into ChatGPT conversation? And it depends on the problem, but more often than not, I'm definitely leaning towards the ChatGPT solution.
Yeah. Hey, moment of silence for Stack Overflow, because that used to be the go-to, and I almost never go there anymore thanks to ChatGPT. Yeah. There's nothing more depressing than pulling up an answer on Stack Overflow and you see it's from like 2015. You're like, well, that's not going to work. And then there's nothing else. But yeah, it's toast. I'm kind of curious if there's some metrics on traffic for Stack Overflow, and I'm sure ChatGPT is trolling it for the occasional update or something like that. But I would say it has to have seriously cut into the site traffic.
This is actually kind of an interesting potential tragedy of the commons situation, because a big part of the reason ChatGPT is so good at helping is because they fed it with everything ever put into Stack Overflow. Mm-hmm. And so you have this knowledge base, and that knowledge base is distilled into a really helpful tool, and then people use the tool instead of the knowledge base. If we fast forward, 10 years, something like that, what are we going to train all of our future, our future tools on? Right. Maybe we'll be able to train them on ChatGPT, have them interact with ChatGPT. But it's an interesting problem because, if you look into how GPT-4, well, and I guess all the ChatGPT engines, how they were trained, it basically amounted to using all of these tools that we're talking about, and just kind of distilling out the useful and good information in the same way, a person would learn to do that over time. So.
Oh, for sure. I was just going to mention, I think there's still some merit to Stack Overflow, especially for some obscure issues where you're typing in a sentence and Google will autocomplete the sentence and take you to a Stack Overflow issue where some poor helpless engineer is having the same exact issue as you. I think there's some sort of merit to being able to see another person parsing the data, and seeing that conversation happen as well, where you go to an issue which maybe has been resolved a year or so ago, and someone's offers a solution, and then the person responds well, this solution is actually getting me this, and this isn't quite what I want. And I'll notice that lining up with my experiences, and kind of watching somebody else have that conversation with the community, or being able to have the conversation back and forth with the community as well. If you're trying to solve it, there's just still some merit, at least
there's still value to
exactly.
it. Yeah, agreed. I just found an article that said that on a year-over-year basis, traffic to Stack Overflow has been down by an average of 6% every month since January of 2022, and was down 13.9% in March. So it's definitely had an impact. But like Dan said, eventually we're going to run into problems that ChatGPT can't just parse the documentation and old Stack Overflow. So people are going to be right back to that community aspect at some point. Tyler, go ahead. You had a question for us.
So I wanted to ask Boris how the phrasing of questions relates to the role of prompt engineers. And more for Dan, if you can expand on this prompt engineering role that appears to be showing up more frequently, even for our healthcare clients.
Prompt engineering is interesting. It's certainly a skill. It's kind of the newest version of what people call Google foo. And it definitely does. There are some people who are just much better at finding information using Google. And I think similarly, there are people who I think it's largely a product of how much you interact with it, because you get a feel for how to more effectively interact with it. Like Boris was talking about, the better ways to give ChatGPT, additional context so it can better address your questions. That's it's an interesting thing. I've heard differing opinions around the whole prompt engineer thing, because it's certainly a skill, but from what I've read, it also appears to be potentially a quickly vanishing skill, because a lot of the skill that goes into prompt engineering is overcoming limitations in the current models. Even GPT-4, as good as it is, will sometimes not understand things, or will provide extraneous details or things. And a lot of prompt engineering is knowing how to get it to not do those things, or there's a famous one where if you say think step by step or something like that, if you put that at the end of any prompt, it kind of prompts ChatGPT to lay things out in a more logical way, and it improves the accuracy of the results that come back, or how good they are by a few % or something in terms of rating. There are some interesting papers on this, but it's also the reason I say it's kind of a potentially vanishing one is that if these engines continue getting better or faster, the need for that kind of thing is going to go away, because the systems are going to get better at in kind of figuring out what your intent is when you ask things. That's kind of part of making these systems more intelligent, is getting them better at intuiting, what you're actually going for, what you're getting. And then also another interesting thing is there have been studies that found that LLMs like ChatGPT are actually really good if you plug them into kind of an iterative process. They're really good at coming up with their own prompts. So there's a potential where you could have a user put in a prompt, feed it into some kind of self-improving loop that turns it into a better prompt automatically, and then gives you a response to that improved prompt, which is an interesting property of these LLMs. They seem very intelligent in some ways, but sometimes they don't really have any kind of self-awareness. So they'll say something really dumb, and if you just point out, hey, that's kind of dumb, they'll say, oh yeah, it is, and then it'll respond in a much more clear way if you just point it out. And yeah, there are some interesting things that have tried kind of automating that process of iteratively, improving on what might be suboptimal answers initially. So
for anybody listening, what can help them? Like, what are some good resources to help them with prompt engineering? I feel like probably those of us with the engineer brain kind of naturally think through, how can I get more information out of this, or how can I circumvent, like you were saying. But there's definitely people that have been surprised at how I've shown them how to use ChatGPT. What are some resources that, aside from like YouTube, any specific resource, or is there anyone out there that's kind of on the forefront with prompt engineering?
The best, actually, I don't even know. I've actually done a fair amount of reading around this, and I don't even know if you need a resource per se, because there are kind of two core things to know. And if you know these and if you apply them consistently, you're going to get pretty much as good a result as you can get. Well, actually, maybe I'll say three, but the third one is a bit more difficult. The first one is there was actually, I think it was published on Archive, the study website. Maybe we could link it if I can find it later. But there's a very simple one where, like I referenced earlier, you can just type whatever your prompt is, and then afterwards just say, let's think step by step. And that alone puts the LLM in a mode where it just gives way better, more accurate, more logically consistent answers for whatever reason. And there's some theory that it has something to do with letting it use the context space, which is like the input, use the context space as kind of a working memory almost, or something, which is interesting, but we don't need to get into the details of it. But that's the simplest thing you can do. Mm-hmm. And that, improves things pretty significantly. The other thing you could do is there's a distinction. There's called zero-shot learning, or one-shot or few-shot learning. If you read it all about these AI systems, you'll run into those terms a lot. Zero shot just means you just ask it a question. You don't give it any kind of example of how you want it to respond or anything like that. And zero shot is always, and just as a general rule, is always less accurate than one shot or few shot learning. So the best thing you can do, this takes a little more work than the first one, but if you take a prompt, whatever the thing is that you're thinking, if you think of another example and then give it an example answer in the form that you want. So if you say, for example, I'm looking for a list of top authors in whatever genre, and then you say, here's an example of the format, and it's a list, and then you give, under each author, it has a list of their most famous books or something like that, and then you say, now give me a list of scientists in, it doesn't have to be directly related, but give me a list of top scientists in a given field, something that's analogous, and then say, and do it in the same format. That's like a one-shot learning example. You get way better examples with that because it knows by example exactly what you're looking for, exactly the form of answer you want. So those are the two biggest, as from what I've read. The two biggest things is let's think step by step, and if you can do one or two or however many shot learning instead of zero shot learning by giving examples, that's really powerful. The third one, which is more complicated, is there are systems that have tried to, I kind of referred to this earlier, but they'll do like iterative things where they'll feed the previous answer from ChatGPT back into it and have it iterate and improve its own answer. And that seems to be even more powerful, but generally you have to, create a Python script that does it or something like that. It's more complicated.
Gotcha. Guys, can you tell Dan is passionate about AI?
Dan is just prepared for AI to take over the world, so he's just doing as much
absolutely
force that as possible.
Yeah, Bard is definitely looking for comrades and people that it can use as its avatars in the real world. I think Dan's the first.
Yeah, I'm applying for the job.
Is that the iteration? We need to be as good of friends with the AI. Yeah. And I know that AI is going to take this podcast and use it
absolutely
as part of its model. So.
Yeah. We're part of the record now. We're going to be part of GTP or GPT-5. Yeah. So
I, for one, welcome our AI overlords.
Right. Absolutely.
Diplomacy by Boris.
So one last question about just AI, just in general, and we'll start with Boris and then Dan. So when it comes to, interviewing for positions, HCM is always looking for a new engineer to get on a project or something like that. How important would you say a working knowledge of using an AI tool is going forward? Is that something you definitely look for? Or are you just like, hey, as long as you're an expert with this specific code stack, you're fine?
Yeah, I definitely, I've seen, we've had to scale up for a current project, and I've seen kind of Dan go through the process of trying to find engineers, and just seeing it from this side kind of helps you learn what is actually useful in a fellow employee, a fellow developer that's joining your team, and what someone would look for in a role. And I think a really important skill to have all the time, not just now with AI getting larger, is having your finger on the pulse and knowing what technology is coming up and what can be useful, and also just the very concept of being a self-starter and being able to get up to par and get up to speed quickly. Not to say that you're expected to, code full features, day one, but knowing how to utilize something like AI as a tool and being able to say, spin up new code and then run into a couple of questions, and before asking your superiors, unless it's something that's very obvious that you can ask and get an answer right away with people familiar to it, but being able to have another tool to ask a question of, I'm getting this Visual Studio error, what am I, it's just another way you can become self-sufficient and really impress your team by just being like, oh no, I got that. I didn't run into any issues. So being on top of emerging technology, number one, is huge. And I think AI, rather than fear the inevitability of it, just accept it as another tool to have in your, in your inventory. And yeah, just being self-sufficient and trying to stay ahead of the issue, and trying to figure things out yourself. AI is just a massive, help for that. So I definitely think it's important right now. Just get your feet wet, know how it works, know how to prompt what you need, and just understand how it could be useful to you, and regardless of the line of work you're doing.
Gotcha. Dan, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Boris said, and I think as a more general principle, I think it's less important that the person is, although I guess this would change over time, but with ChatGPT and all that being relatively new, I think it's less important whether they're already super good at using it or at using Copilot or using any of these tools, because a lot of them are really new. Mm-hmm. I think what's more important is if they're the type of person with the type of mindset that is eager and able, I guess, to kind of use whatever tools are available to get things done, which is kind of what Boris was saying also. And, I'm just thinking back, when Google first started, before that, it was, it was like a whole new, very powerful tool, I guess, to find information that we didn't have before. And then I think this is at least as important. The whole AI revolution, or whatever you want to call it, is at least as important. I personally think it's significantly more important, but it's still just a tool. And I think having the mindset where you're eager to take advantage of tools, because all these tools are kind of, force multipliers. They're kind of, we talked about the productivity increases, and all that, and just having the mindset that you enjoy, exploring and using new tools like that, I think is more important than, the specifics of it, of already knowing how to use X, Y, or Z tool. Right. But yeah, I agree with Boris. It's important.
The HTM value of growth mindset, is that what I hear you're describing?
And there it is. Absolutely.
100%.
Very cool. Well, guys, there's a reason we call it quick hits, but that does not apply today. This was an awesome conversation. It really is. And I know, Dan, we could probably get you on again to just let you talk AI. In fact, I might just hit record and throw a grenade, and then we'll come back an hour later and see how you're doing. But I definitely I really like the attitude that you guys have just in general about software engineering and the future, and always looking to use those new tools. Dan and Boris have built some really cool things for other clients and customers. So just a shameless plug here for Health Data Movers. If you are looking for a couple of just awesome software engineers, hit us up at solutions@healthdatamovers.com. And also, hey, this would be a great time to kind of plug our socials as well. LinkedIn and Twitter. You'll find us, Health Data Movers, posting various articles, healthcare IT news, looking to interact with new and existing consultants. If you're a software engineer who is not in the healthcare industry yet, and maybe you're interested, let us know. These would be a couple of great guys to mentor under. So thanks again for joining us. Dan, hopefully I get out to Vegas to visit you. Boris, we need to go have some curry again.
Yeah, more katsu curry. I'll find the right place this
time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tyler, if you make it out to the Pacific Midwest or Pacific Northwest, Boris is just over the river as well. So you get to visit 2 HTM employees.
Excellent.
So anyway, guys, thank you so much for the great conversation. And we'll see you on the next Quick Hits.
Thanks for having us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Have a good one.